You know, there comes a time when even the loudest voices grow quiet. And I want to talk to you today about something deeper than just headlines and breaking news. This isn't just about politics. It's about a man, a moment, and a reckoning. Donald Trump, a name that once commanded boardrooms, news cycles, and arenas packed with loyal followers, is now a man on edge. Not just politically, but emotionally. And I don't say that with glee or malice. I say it with the clarity of someone who's seen what fear really looks like in the eyes of powerful people when the walls start closing in. Because let me tell you something, this is sheer panic, and not just panic from losing polls or political misstep. This is the kind of panic that creeps into a man's chest at 3 a.m. when he realizes that the empire he built wasn't made of bricks, but of mirrors and smoke. And now the smoke is clearing. I've sat across from presidents, I've spoken with billionaires, I've held the hands of women who've survived wars and children who've lost everything. And the truth, the raw, painful, unshakable truth, is that when a man like Trump begins to lose control, he doesn't go silent. No, he gets louder. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. You've heard the shouts, the threats, the claims of witch hunts and deep state conspiracies. You've seen him pacing the stage, his hands clenched, his voice trembling beneath layers of bluster. You've heard him say again and again, "They're not after me, they're after you." But my friends, that's not leadership. That's fear. That's the sound of a man who's backed into a corner and can't figure out where the door is anymore. Donald Trump is facing legal fire from all sides. Investigations, indictments, civil suits. It's as if the very ground he walks on has turned into quicksand. And every time he tries to climb out, he sinks just a little deeper. And let me tell you, panic doesn't just whisper. It screams in silence. It drives people to do desperate things, and desperate is exactly how he's acting. You see, power doesn't protect you forever. It may buy you time, it may shield you from scrutiny. But eventually the truth comes knocking. And when it does, no wall is high enough, no tweet is loud enough, no rally is big enough to shut it out. Now some people, maybe even people you know and love, still believe he's fighting for them. And I understand that, I really do. Because when people feel left behind, they cling to the loudest voice that promises to bring them forward. But here's what I ask you to do. Listen beyond the noise. Look at the man behind the slogans, behind the gold letters, behind the show. What do you see? I see a man unraveling. A man who built a brand on being untouchable, now facing the cold, hard truth that no one is. A man who weaponized fear only to be consumed by it. A man who said only I can fix it, now pleading for loyalty in courtrooms instead of campaign rallies. There's something profoundly human about watching someone who once appeared unshakable begin to fracture. We don't always talk about it because in politics, especially American politics, we're conditioned to admire dominance, power, control. And Donald Trump knew that better than anyone. He didn't just play the game, he built a golden throne from the marble floors of Trump Tower to the roar of the crowds at his rallies. He mastered the illusion, the image, the empire of invincibility. But illusions, my friends, don't last forever. They shimmer, they sparkle, they distract, until one day, they crack. And now we are watching that illusion break. Slowly, loudly, publicly. A man who once declared himself above reproach, a man who looked directly into a camera and claimed I alone can fix it, is beginning to show signs of panic. not the kind that you can see in obvious ways. This is the kind of panic that starts inside, quiet at first, a tremble beneath the skin, a twitch of the eye, a sudden need to talk longer, louder, more viciously. Because when the illusion of being untouchable begins to fade, the fear comes rushing in to take its place. Donald Trump was a master illusionist. He built his brand and eventually his political power not on quiet integrity, not on careful policy or humble service, but on the performance of strength. He knew what it meant to appear larger than life, to control a room, to command attention. His words didn't always make sense, but they made headlines. His presence didn't soothe people's fears, it stirred them. And for a time that worked. It worked brilliantly, because in a nation where many felt invisible, Trump offered a spectacle they couldn't stop watching. But when you build a world out of spectacle, you become trapped by it. Because the minute you stop performing, or worse, the minute people stop clapping, the empire begins to shake. That's what we're witnessing right now. A shaking empire, a man clinging to a narrative that is unraveling in real time. The man who once walked into rooms like a king now storms into courtrooms like a cornered animal. And let me say this, I do not rejoice in the unraveling of any person. Because behind every public fall is a private ache. But what we must understand, what we must not ignore, is that this isn't just about a man. It's about a moment. A moment when power, for the first time in a long time, is being asked to account for itself. Donald Trump's greatest fear is not losing an election. It's not even going to prison. His deepest fear is losing control of the story. Because he has always believed that if he can control the story, the media, the headlines, the slogans, he can control the people. But what happens when the story starts to write itself? What happens when the people begin to see through the glitter, the noise, the bravado? He feels it now. That tightening in his chest, that throb behind the temples, that creeping thought at 2 a.m. that maybe, just maybe, the truth is coming, and he can't stop it. That's where the panic begins. Not in the courtroom, not in the campaign, but in the silence of a man who once thought he could never be touched, now realizing that the touch of justice, of reality, is colder than he ever imagined. We have seen this before in his powerful men who fly too close to the sun, convinced they are fireproof until they aren't. And what burns isn't just their legacy, it's the illusion they sold to others. The belief that they were somehow above the laws that govern us all. But nobody is above the truth. Not even a man with a jet, a tower, and 1 million followers chanting his name. And so now we sit at the edge of this great reckoning. Not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Because when a man who once seemed unbreakable starts to break, we must not turn away. We must not be distracted by the noise he throws like confetti into the air. We must look closely, listen deeply, and understand what's really happening. This is not just the fall of a man. This is the fall of an illusion. The unraveling of a performance that lasted far too long. And in its place, we are left with something messy, something real. A man in sheer panic. And what we do next, how we respond, how we choose truth over spectacle, principle over personality, will define who we are, not just as a nation, but as a people. Because the illusion may be fading, but the lessons it leaves behind, they are ours to carry forward. There are moments in a person's life when silence speaks louder than a scream, and shame settles in without ever saying a word. For Donald Trump, those moments are now coming one after another, not behind the closed doors of a private life, but under the blinding lights of the American justice system, the very system he once waved off as a puppet show, a formality for others, but never for him, is now writing its own chapters, and his name is on every single page. And I need you to understand this clearly. This is no longer about political theater. This is the law catching up. This is reality, refusing to be denied. One courtroom after another. One indictment, followed by another investigation. One headline replaced by another revelation. And with every filing, every charge, every testimony, the space around him, and though he may still raise his fist for the cameras, behind that carefully curated image is a man at war with time. A man no longer in control of the stage, but being dragged, sometimes kicking, sometimes silent, into the harsh light of accountability. Now, I've spent my life interviewing people from every walk of life, presidents and prisoners, teachers and billionaires, and there is one truth I've learned over and over again. You cannot run from yourself forever. You can lie, spin, distract, charm, threaten, but eventually, the consequences arrive. And that's where Donald Trump finds himself today. No matter how loudly he calls it a witch hunt, no matter how fiercely he points fingers, the law moves forward. And what's extraordinary, what is almost poetic in a way, is that these aren't just one or two accusations whispered in secret. These are full-scale legal battles on every front. Federal charges, state-level indictments, civil lawsuits, criminal proceedings, prosecutors preparing, judges reviewing evidence thicker than any business deal he ever made. And none of it is happening in the shadows. America is watching. The world is watching, because this is a moment unlike any we've lived through before. A former president standing, not on ceremony, but in front of a judge, pleading not for applause, but for acquittal. And you know what happens in those rooms, don't you? The cameras are turned off. The slogans don't matter. In court, the truth doesn't yield to celebrity. It stands tall quietly, firmly, demanding to be heard. And for a man like Trump, who has lived a life of deflection and dominance, that truth is terrifying. He's never had to face consequences like this. The world always bent to his name. Deals were struck. Allies protected him. Lawyers cleaned up the messes. But this time is different. Because the accusations aren't about bad business or tasteless words. They are about democracy, about national security, about the soul of this country. And the stakes are not just political. They are moral. He knows it. You can feel it in the way he talks. The anger, the fury. But also, if you listen closely, the fear. He rants about unfairness, but his eyes are darting, searching for a way out. He cries about being targeted, but the law isn't following opinion, it's following evidence. And that is something even Donald Trump can't tweet away. The legal storm is closing in, and here's the truth he never expected to face. He is no longer the master of this moment, he is the subject of it. And though he tries to stand tall, the pressure is immense. Because when the charges come from all directions, when witnesses are sworn in, when the jury is selected, the games end, and the man who always claimed to play chess while others played checkers now finds himself cornered, out of moves, and out of time. I do not celebrate his fear. I do not cheer for his downfall. But I do stand for justice, for truth, for every American who believed they'd never see a powerful man held to the same standards as everyone else. This moment matters because it shows us that in the end, no tower is too tall to fall, no ego too big to break, no illusion too grand to outshine the weight of accountability. He is now standing where many never imagined he'd be. Not on a red carpet, not behind a podium, but before the law. And though he still performs, still fights to keep the illusion alive, the panic is written all over the process. It's in the dozens of attorneys, the late-night emergency filings, the strategy shifts, the backroom calls. That's not control. That's survival. So yes, Donald Trump is in panic, sheer panic. Not because he's losing a political battle, but because for the first time in his life, he's staring down the one force he cannot bully, charm, or ignore: justice. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, we must agree on this. The truth must be heard, and the law must be honored. Because if America is to mean anything, it must mean this: that no one, not even a former president, is above the law. Have you ever watched a room full of people who once swore absolute devotion suddenly avoid eye contact with the very person they used to praise? That uneasy shuffle of feet, the polite coughs, the phones glanced at too often, those are the first tremors of loyalty cracking. In Donald Trump's world, loyalty was the currency that kept the empire humming. He measured it in applause lines and signed NDAs and those sharp little nods from advisors who understood that pleasing him meant keeping their seats at the table. But what happens when the table itself begins to wobble? When subpoenas arrive with dawn light and former confidants feel the chill of prosecutors whispering, "Help us tell the truth or be swallowed whole by it." Suddenly, people who once basked in Trump's glow are casting shadows in directions of their own. And nothing ignites panic faster than the sense that your inner circle is slipping away one whispered deal, one secret memorandum at a time. I have sat across from people whose power seemed eternal, only to see it evaporate when the helpers, the handlers, the insiders realized the cost of staying close had become too steep. There is always a moment, a precise, nearly invisible click when self-preservation outweighs allegiance. You can almost feel it in the air like static before a summer storm. And that moment has come for Donald Trump. Look at the cast of characters lining up for interviews with investigators. Aides who once bragged about never flipping, lawyers who once thundered on television, cabinet officials who once quoted scripture about serving a great leader. Listen to the shifting tone of their statements, subtle at first, like trying out a softer key on a piano. "I respect the legal process," they say. "I will tell my truth." That is code for the seal is broken and the stories will flow. Trump knows this code. He spent decades perfecting it, rewarding those who spoke the lines he wrote and banishing those who missed a cue. He believed fear would keep them silent forever, that the promise of future power or the threat of losing access to it was enough to bind hearts and tongue. But fear is fickle. Point it in the other direction and it becomes a lever prying people loose. Fear of him is now eclipsed by fear of indictments, of legal fees that eat through retirement funds, of reputations in tatter. And night after night, behind gilded doors, Trump grapples with the realization that the fortress he built out of human loyalty is springing leaks faster than he can plug them. Imagine the late-night phone calls he makes, voice tight, asking, "You're still with me, right?" Picture the silence on the other end because the line is being recorded, because a lawyer is mouthing, "Say nothing." That silence is a roar in his ears. It tells him the circle is broken. It tells him he may walk into court and see former advisors sitting for the prosecution, their testimony annotated with dates, times, screenshots, the kinds of receipts no campaign rally can shred. He hears rumors that a once trusted lieutenant has spent 30 hours with investigators. He reads that a loyal press surrogate has signed an immunity deal, and panic, real panic, tightens its grip. For the rest of us, this is a civics lesson unfolding in flesh and bone. We are witnessing what happens when loyalty is treated as a one-way street, when it is demanded but never nourished, when the relationship is transactional rather than relational. True loyalty is watered by mutual respect, by truth shared even when it stings, by the knowledge that standing beside someone will not drown you in their misdeeds. But Donald Trump never asked for that kind of loyalty. He asked for silence, for cover, for the suspension of personal conscience. And conscience, like a caged bird, will fly the moment the door cracks open. Now the door is wide. Former chiefs of staff pen memoirs with chapter titles that read like courtroom exhibits. Campaign strategists quietly hand over encrypted chats. Social media managers save draft tweets they were told to delete. Each small act of self-preservation is a thread pulled from the garment of authority he once wore so proud. And as the threads unravel, he clutches at the remaining fabric, shouting ever louder about treachery, about rats, because that's how he was taught to label disobedience. But labeling will not mend the teeth. You cannot bark loyalty back into being once people have tasted the relief of telling their story. Do not mistake this for schadenfreude. It is instead a reckoning, a reminder that power without humility is a temporary costume. Those who served him are discovering they are characters in a narrative bigger than Trump's mythology. A narrative where moral choices have consequences, where history asks, what did you know? And when did you decide the truth mattered more than your proximity to someone else's spotlight? And Trump, sensing the tide, thrashes against the inevitable because a man who has always counted heads at his table struggles to dine alone. I believe deeply in redemption, in the possibility that people can step forward and choose integrity after years of complicity. I also believe in accountability, the healing force that comes when secrets see daylight. That daylight is beaming into corridors of Mar-a-Lago, into conference rooms once thick with confidentiality agreement, is illuminating the faces of those who once said, "Yes, sir," without hesitation, and are now answering, "Yes, Your Honor," with trembling honesty. Every testimony given, every document unsealed, is a pivot away from fear and towards something more durable. And so as we watch loyalty erode, let us recognize the quiet bravery and, yes, the self-interest driving it. Both are human. Both can coexist. What matters is the outcome, the mosaic of facts pieced together not by external enemies but by former insiders whose whispered confessions have become a choir. Trump's panic grows because he knows that once that choir sings in harmony, the soundtrack of his invincibility will be drowned out forever. And when the final note fades, what remains will not be the myth of a man untouched, but the reality of a leader who demanded everything and gave back only the illusion of safety. That illusion is gone, and the people who once guarded it have stepped into the light, leaving him alone with echoes of a loyalty he can never reclaim. There comes a moment in every great story where the curtain falls and the lights come up, and the audience, no longer swept up in the performance, finally sees what's real. For years, Donald Trump's political presence was more than just policy or partisanship. It was spectacle. It was theater wrapped in red, white, gold. And people, millions of people watched, some with admiration, some with rage, but almost all with attention. But now, something is shifting, slowly at first, and now like a wave that can't be turned back. The audience is beginning to see the man behind the curtain. The gold is chipping, the slogans sound stale, the volume's still up, but the magic is gone. And that, right there, is what has Donald Trump more terrified than any courtroom. America is seeing him clearly for the first time. There's a dangerous kind of power in illusion. It can make people believe what they need to instead of what's true. For a long time, Trump stood not as a president in the traditional sense, but as a symbol. To his supporters, he was defiance, strength, disruption, and to his critics, he was chaos personified. But both sides were watching him through a filter crafted by years of reality television, aggressive branding, and relentless noise. That filter made him seem invincible, beyond rules, beyond reproach, billionaire outsider who told it like it is. But now, the filter is cracking. You can feel it when he speaks. The swagger is still there, but the spark is gone. The jokes don't land like they used to. The nicknames sound full. And worst of all, for a man like Trump, people are starting to roll their eyes. That's the beginning of the end for any illusion, when the performance no longer inspires awe but discomfort. When even the loyal start to squirm. And it's not because they've suddenly become opponents, it's because they're starting to recognize that what once looked like leadership may have been something else entirely. We're seeing the emperor without his clothes now, not literally but in every metaphorical sense that matters. We're seeing the man who told us he could fix it all, suddenly unable to fix anything. Not the legal chaos, not the deflating crowds, not even his own public image. And it's not just the media pointing this out, it's former allies, lifelong Republicans, ex-administration officials. They're not throwing punches, they're simply speaking facts. The kind of plain, quiet facts that pierce through even the loudest denial. It's easy to perform strength. All it takes is a microphone and enough people willing to clap. But real strength, that shows up when the applause stops. Real strength is humility. It's grace under fire. It's the ability to face consequences without blaming the whole world. But Trump doesn't know how to do that. Because his strength was always a mask, and now the strings are fraying. And once people see behind the mask, they rarely unsee it. The American public has grown tired. Tired of the chaos. Tired of the anger. Tired of a man who speaks of law and order but runs from the law. Who talks about truth but is followed by fact-checkers with red pens and long lists. And that tiredness, that's what he fears most. Because Trump doesn't need everyone to love him. He just needs them to pay attention. His power lives in the spotlight. But the spotlight is shifting. It's moving away slowly but surely, and he can feel it. That's why the speeches are louder. That's why the claims are wilder. That's why the attacks are more vicious. Because for a man who fed off attention, irrelevance feels like death. When the crowds begin to thin, when the cheers begin to falter, a performer starts performing harder, That's exactly what we're seeing. He's pushing every button. Fear, grievance, outrage. Hoping to restart the machine. But what he doesn't realize is that people are exhausted. Exhausted by the drama, by the never-ending headlines, by the feeling that America has been trapped in a reality show with no commercial break, and now they're reaching for the remote. I've talked to people, good, kind-hearted, everyday Americans, who once felt seen by Trump, who thought maybe he was their voice. But today they're questioning, not because someone told them to, but because they're finally listening with different ears. They're asking, what did he really do for me? Who did he help, besides himself? And that is the most powerful shift of all. Not anger, not betrayal, just quiet realization. This isn't about left or right anymore. It's about truth and illusion, about recognizing when we've been sold a performance and deciding not to buy a second act. And I know that's hard. It's hard to admit when we were wrong, hard to let go of the person we hoped someone would be. But there is great strength, not weakness, in saying, I see things differently now. That is what's happening across this country, slowly, steadily. The illusion is dissolving, and the man behind it is standing there exposed. No teleprompter, no applause, just a man with too much noise around him and not enough truth within him. There is a certain kind of panic that doesn't shout, it whispers. It creeps in quietly, hiding beneath the surface of a smile or buried beneath a booming voice. And in Donald Trump's case, that panic doesn't arrive in silence, it hides behind projection. Because when a man who has spent his life mastering the art of control starts to lose his grip, he doesn't just crumble, he throws shadows, he points fingers, he projects his fear onto everyone else and tries to convince the world that the danger isn't inside him, it's coming for all of us. That's exactly what we're seeing right now, when he says they're not after me, they're after you. It's not a message of solidarity, it's not a call to protect the people, it's a mask, a smokescreen. It's the sound of a man who cannot face the consequences of his own actions, so he projects them outward. It's not about us, it's about him, his fear, his reckoning, his unraveling. Projection is one of the oldest defense mechanisms in the human mind. When someone feels threatened, exposed, vulnerable, they look for somewhere to redirect that pain. For Donald Trump, that somewhere has always been someone: the media, the judges, the FBI, the Democrats, the deep state, the immigrants, the allies, who turned, the institutions that dared to hold him accountable, the mirror that shows him who he truly is. Every time he feels cornered, he reaches for a target, and in doing so he tries to make us believe that the threat isn't coming from him, but toward him. But let me tell you something I've learned from decades of sitting across from people on every end of the human spectrum, from survivors to manipulators, from wounded children to powerful adults hiding their own fragility. When someone shows you who they're afraid of, they're really showing you what they see in themselves. That fear, it isn't coming from the outside, it's rising from within. It's panic disguised as power. Trump tells us that the system is corrupt, that the elections are rigged, that the prosecutors are partisan, that the courts are unfair. But ask yourself, is that the voice of truth, or the voice of fear? Because the man who once called himself a genius strategist now cannot even trust the very game he once claimed to dominate. He's casting doubt, not to enlighten the public, but to cast a cloud over the truth. Because in that fog of confusion, maybe, just maybe, he can disappear from responsibility once again. And that's the thing about projection. It's never about clarity, it's about distortion. When someone projects, they take the pain inside themselves and paint it on someone else's face. It's not I'm scared, it's you should be scared. It's not I might lose, it's they're trying to silence you. It's a desperate attempt to deflect accountability by convincing the crowd that their loyalty is under attack. That the house isn't burning down because the owner lit the fire, but because the neighbors hate him. Let's be clear, this isn't strategy, this is survival. And it's messy, it's frantic. You can hear it in the contradictions, in the stories that change by the hour, in the tweets that sound more like screams than statements.
You can feel the fear pulsating beneath every interview, every rally, every desperate plea for donations, wrapped in language that sounds like a war cry. Trump isn't calm, he isn't confident, he's cornered, and like many men with unchecked egos and wounded pride, he's reacting the only way he knows how, by blaming the world around him for the storm he stirred up himself. But here's the danger, and I want you to listen closely. When projection comes from a man with a microphone, with millions listening, it doesn't just stay his problem, it becomes everyone's. Because his fear morphs into our confusion, his paranoia turns into division, his inability to face himself becomes a national crisis of trust, and that is the true cost of allowing projection to go unchallenged. When a man in sheer panic tries to rewrite reality in his own favor, we all lose our footing in the I've always believed that the human spirit is more resilient than any lie, that deep down, people know when something isn't right. We feel it in our gut, we hear it in the tremble behind the roar. And I believe that America, this great, complicated, wounded but still reaching country, is beginning to see the projection for what it is, fear wearing a mask of defiance. Donald Trump is afraid, not of the system failing, but of the system working exactly as it should. He's afraid of accountability. He's afraid of justice. He's afraid that the story he wrote for himself, the myth of the untouchable leader, is finally being edited by reality. So let's not absorb his fear. Let's not mistake his panic for profit. Let's not let his projection become our perspective. Because we deserve better, we deserve clarity, we deserve truth. This is not just about one man's panic. It's about what we choose to do with it. Because moments like this, when the world feels loud, divided, uncertain, force us to ask a bigger question, a harder question. What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a nation that follows spectacle, or do we want to be a nation rooted in truth? Donald Trump's panic, as real and desperate as it is, does not define America. It exposes something, but it doesn't decide everything. What it reveals is how fragile our democracy becomes when people prioritize personality over principle, when showmanship gets mistaken for leadership, when being loud gets mistaken for being strong. And now that the noise is beginning to fade, now that the cracks in the show are visible, we are all being called to look deeper, to ask ourselves, have we confused power with presence? Have we mistaken chaos for change? Because this is the truth. I have lived long enough to know when a person shows you who they are, believe them. And Donald Trump has shown us again and again that his highest loyalty is not to truth, not to justice, and not to the American people, but to himself. That's what makes this moment so dangerous and so defining. We are at a crossroads. One path leads us further into the theater, where facts are replaced by feelings, where loyalty to one man overshadows loyalty to the Constitution. The other path leads us into the hard, honest work of rebuilding trust, of choosing leaders who believe in service, not just in winning, who understand that democracy is not a prop for their ego, but a responsibility to every soul who calls this country home. And I say this with love, but also with urgency. The decision is not just up to judges or prosecutors or pundits. It's up to us, you, me, every single person who casts a vote, who shares a story, who teaches a child what character really looks like. Because this panic we're witnessing, it is the last act of a story that was always about control. But if we pay attention, if we listen not just to what's being said but to what's being avoided, we will see the truth. America is bigger than Donald Trump's fear. I know some people are afraid of what happens if he returns to power, afraid of what happens if he doesn't, afraid that the divisions between us have become too deep, the wounds too raw. But fear is not a compass, it's a warning, and it is calling us now to rise, not with rage, not with retaliation, but with responsibility, the kind of responsibility that says, we are not spectators in this democracy, we are the stewards of it. We cannot pretend that what we've witnessed is normal. We cannot normalize the bullying, the disinformation, the endless attacks on the very systems that hold our democracy together. But we also can't fight spectacle with more spectacle. We must fight it with truth, with steady, clear, honest truth. And that truth tells us that Donald Trump's panic is not a signal of his strength, it's evidence of his unraveling. This is a man who once stood in front of the world, and declared, "I alone can fix it," but now the system he tried to bend is holding firm. The judges are still judging, the laws are still being followed, the truth is still marching forward, and for the first time he can't outrun it. That's the beauty of justice. It may move slowly, but it moves, and right now it is moving through the noise, past the tweets and speeches and rallies, straight towards something real, and we get to decide how we respond. We can choose hope over hysteria, accountability over arrogance. We can choose to be the generation that said, "Enough of the spectacle, enough of the chaos." We're choosing the hard road, back to truth. It won't be easy. The wounds of the past few years run deep, but I believe, deep in my bones, that we are capable of healing, that we can move from division to dignity, that we can raise children who don't just inherit a country but help shape it with integrity, because this moment, this panic, it is not permanent, but what we choose in response to it can shape our future for generations. Let's not be a nation that follows a man in crisis. Let's be a nation that rises above the crisis, with clarity, that sees the unraveling for what it is, not a call to fight for him but a reminder to fight for what's right. Donald Trump's panic is loud, but our wisdom can be loud. His fear is visible, but our courage can shine brighter. Let us be the calm in this storm. Let us be the light in this darkness. And most of all, let us remember, democracy is not a show. It's not a brand. It's not a rally. It is a promise, and it's ours to keep.